Chris Yandex, C1 interview covering Las Vegas and the world. If you have not already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with everything we have going on here at C1 interview in Milan. Hit that subscribe button below. Share this video with your friends. Like this video. This is going to be a good one, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about today the Mr. McMahon documentary series that is now on Netflix that was released last week. I did have a chance to watch the entire 6-part edition of it. And I'm just going to tell you, if you love professional wrestling, if you love the nostalgia of professional wrestling, of looking back to the highs of professional wrestling back about 20 years ago, a little bit more than that, you will absolutely love this documentary series, but it will be definitely a trip down memory lane. And just a disclaimer before I get further into it, my beginnings in media, of course, were covering professional wrestling from, the peak years of 2000 to 2004. I spoke with many of the great superstars in the industry. Of course, many of them were in the Netflix documentary series, including Steve Austin, Triple H, Paul Heyman, Trish Stratus, among others. I also had many conversations with prominent professional wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer, who's in it all the way through. And Dave, featured many of my interviews on WrestlingObserver.com back in the day. Dave also came on my, wrestling media radio program at the time back in the day. And so it's always interesting speaking with Dave because you always learn something, and he knows professional wrestling probably better than most people will ever know in the world. He's up there in that top less than 1%. So, just to begin, professional wrestling was a big part of my life growing up. I wanted to, these guys were my heroes, and I wanted to be a part of it. So, we had an early podcast before the word was called a podcast, and we started recording professional wrestling interviews, and they ended up on a bunch of different wrestling media outlets. So just to begin, I want to start with the following. Also Jake the Snake Roberts, went to my college graduation from the University of Florida in 2009. So professional wrestling was always part of my life, and knew a lot of these guys, used to talk ongoing with James Harris, Kamala, also Paul Bearer. Used to talk to these guys on an ongoing basis, chat with these guys on an ongoing basis. These people were friends, Bill Alfonso as well. There is just, so much of my early media life before we got to cover Hollywood celebrities and political figures and sports athletes and everything basically in between. Professional wrestling was the beginning of my media years and my interviewing years, and CY and before CY interview, of course. So I want to begin just by going down some of the highlights of the six-part series. They focus on, of course, the rise of Hulkamania, and you get to see Hulk Hogan, and you really get to see how Hulkamania really led the wrestling business in so many other ways. Of course, Hogan, of course, was in Rocky III. That helped as well. But you really get to see, the business relationship and what the relationship was like between Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan. And it obviously always wasn't perfect, but business is business at the end of the day. And you learn in the documentary series that, that McMahon didn't care about personal grudges, that he would bring somebody back into the World Wrestling Entertainment and put them back on programming if he thought he could make money with the person. It was always about business with him. And he emphasizes that as McMahon gives many interviews in this series. There were a set of them, and he talks about how he didn't hold personal grudges. After the Hogan era, of course, then you, of course, focus on the Attitude Era with Austin and The Rock and the others, and how basically the business just literally, of course, took off after that. And there, of course, are many, controversial things that the WWE did during this time when the ratings, when they were getting, over 6 million viewers a week. WCW was still on the air. Monday Nitro was getting around 3 million. On average during that period of time, during the Monday Night Wars, there were 10 million people close to watching professional wrestling every week. But once Nitro, WCW Monday Nitro, and the company of WCW was bought out by the World Wrestling Entertainment, there was at least 3 to 4 million people who never watched professional wrestling ever again after that. So, the Attitude Era, of course, huge boom because Stone Cold said so. The Rock, Mick Foley, some of the big stars, from that time, of course, led the business to its highest ratings, that it ever had. And today, the company's getting on average about, I think, like 2 million for their Monday night show, and they were getting 6 million at that point. So you can imagine how much the world has changed in 20 plus years since pro wrestling was at its absolute peak. There's obviously still a fan base today. There are still thousands and millions of people, across the world who love watching professional wrestling, but that was just a special era. And then, of course, you also focused on how ECW, became kind of a minor league place for WWE to pick up many of their great talents, including Steve Austin, and then many others, went over, of course, over the years, including the likes of Tommy Dreamer and Just Incredible in later years. These guys, made their name in ECW, and they ended up going all the way over to World Wrestling Entertainment, and having, more bigger profiles and careers and things like that. But, Paul Heyman, who, great guy, great visionary, had an interesting concept, Extreme Championship Wrestling, that it was, it was just a different kind of show and had a very loyal fan base, and that's what it was. One of the things I was disappointed about with the documentary series was, you had Eric Bischoff in there talking about the days of World Championship Wrestling, which I thought was great. You obviously get into great detail about the NWO, and Hogan and Bischoff, do a good job commenting about what was going on at WCW at the time. And of course, also, we looking back on that also during that era was the Montreal Screwjob, of course. And we get both Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels' comments on what happened during that time. And, and then of course, obviously focusing on the death of Owen Hart. I think what's great about the documentary series is it really focuses on, the highs and the positives of professional wrestling, but you also get a very insight into the controversial moments in professional wrestling over the last, 30 years. There is not, you see them as many of the positives as you do the negatives, and it does seem like a very balanced series in that regard, But those are my thoughts on the Mr. McMahon documentary series. If you're really looking for a trip down memory lane on pro wrestling, that is what it is. And we're going to have to, if you follow that era, you may not learn a heck of a lot, but it will be a nice trip down memory lane. If you were a pro wrestling fan, but you really weren't into the insider side of the business, and again, the dirt sheets and, the people who would give the locker room secrets away, you are going to learn a lot, I think. Those are my thoughts on the Mr. McMahon documentary series. I'm Christianic for CY Interview. This was an early part of my life, and it was interesting to watch, and it brought back many memories. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with everything we have going on, and I'll see you in the next one.